Chapter 8. Slaythek scowled as he came awake in the early dawn light. He could feel the ship under him beginning to negotiate the harbor of Mortagen. As he went up on deck, the wonderful scent of roasted biat beans greeted him. He inhaled the intoxicating aroma that had made him a rich man. He and his father had brought 2 shiploads of the beans with them this season. While they had other items to trade, nothing was as profitable as biat. He could sell every last bag at 10 times the price he paid for them in Magbaiho. He vaguely wondered what the barbarians had drunk before his father started bringing the beans. His father was standing at the bow as their ship followed the Korthlundian pilot boat through the treacherous maze that marked the harbor entrance. Mortagen was the only harbor in the entire barbaric country. High tide was the only time the harbor was accessible at all, and even then only a fool would try to make the passage without paying for the guidance of a local vessel. Slaythek admitted the harbor had its advantages. While it made trade difficult, any invading fleet would find itself broken up on the rocks and reefs. His father beckoned him forward. Slaythek reluctantly joined him. The older man was fondling the miniature he normally wore around his neck and staring at the painting of Spritzivigiga, Slaythek's sister. Slaythek wore a similar miniature around his own neck, and he felt an ache of longing for the sister who disappeared when he was only 8 years old. Over his father's shoulder, he stared into the emerald green eyes. Her long, curly black hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and her skin was the rich, creamy color of hot biat. "Will it be this year we find some signs of Spree, Slaythek?" His father used his full name. Slaythek's shoulders tightened. "Father, I loved her as much as you did, but she's been gone for over 20 years. You can't possibly think she's still alive." Although they traced the men who took her to Mortagen, they'd never been able to find any sign of her. He hoped she'd died quickly. "I know you think me a foolish old man, but a father knows things. And as sure as I stand here and breathe, your sister did not die in a brothel. When I'm in this land, I dream of her. I see her happy and surrounded by small children. Spree is dead, father." Slaythek walked away. He too dreamed of Spree in this land, but he wasn't foolish enough to believe in dreams. The ship's captain called out to his father, "Master Robrick, we're through the reefs. We've been given permission to proceed to the docks." Mist called out to Robbie as he rode his horse through the trees. He didn't turn, and she thought it unlikely he heard her. Guilt tugged at her as she followed the path his horse had taken, hoping he'd stop soon so she could catch him. She'd been trying to see him every day since Angus had ordered her from his sickbed, but his worthless excuse for a father hadn't allowed it. "Foolish, vain old woman," she chided herself. "Do you really think it's possible to make up for 16 years of neglect? I don't deserve Danella's forgiveness. Oh, Holy Mother, I should have tried harder to get past the obstacles Angus put between me and his children. I should have known about Robbie's gift and his difficulties." She'd heard him referred to as a demon child, but she never dreamed his own father believed it. Ahead she heard the boy talking to someone, or perhaps to himself, since there seemed to be no reply, but she wasn't yet close enough to understand his words. As she emerged from the trees, Miss gasped. Robbie whirled. What are you doing here?" His eyes darted around the clearing as if looking for an escape route or a place to hide. "The bronze hair they found," she whispered, too awed to speak louder. Behind Robbie stood the most wretched-looking horse Mist had ever seen. It was also the most unnatural one. It appeared as if sores of flesh had erupted on a bronze statue. "This must be—" "You can't tell him he's here. She's not a demon and he'll kill her." The boy looked so vulnerable and afraid it broke her heart to think of what she'd allowed him to suffer. She drew the Star of Sulis. "I promise on the goddess in my mother's grave, I will tell no one what I've seen here today. But where did the beast come from?" Her vow did little to ease the panic in his eyes. "I don't know. She's hurt, and she needs help." "That I can see. What about you? Have you recovered? I've been worried about you, and your father has refused to let me near you." "Why?" he asked, still looking around like a cornered deer. Miss sighed. "He never liked me, and we had a horrible fight. No, why would you worry about me?" "Child, how could I not after what that beast of a brother did to you? Holy Sulis, child, if it weren't for your gift, you wouldn't have survived." "I'm fine now." Robbie turned his back on her and returned to treating the horse. She approached and picked up one of the jars of ointment he'd been using. She nearly dropped it in shock. She sensed Adder's tongue, comfrey, and bruisewort in the mix. But that wasn't all. "Where did you get this?" "I made it," he snapped. "By the Holy Mother, how? Who taught you?" "I'm not as stupid as everyone thinks." He glared at her as if she too had questioned his intelligence. "I can tell things about plants. I didn't need anyone to teach me." Miss gaped at him. "And the magic in them?" "What magic? Are you saying the medicine is cursed by my demon blood?" Robbie's eyes flashed with rage, but underneath the anger, Miss could see his pain and loneliness. "Cursed? Holy Sudas, no! They contain the goddess's holy magic. Who told you you had demon blood? Are you blind? My skin, my eyes, my hair. What child of the goddess looks like this? I killed my own mother. Isn't that evil enough for you?" Miss backed away from the heat of his anger and pain. She collapsed onto a stump, unable to bear up under the weight of her shame. "My child, I am so sorry I left you alone to believe such lies. It isn't your fault your mother died. If anyone is to blame, it is your father. I told him after Boyden was born that another child could kill her. She just wasn't suited for giving birth. Some women aren't. And has your father never told you why you look the way you do? You look just like your mother. And she was no demon. She was merely from a distant land whose name I could never pronounce. Manhoyo or some such thing. She thought it was the Cortlandians that looked odd. She used to say, 'The gods ran out of paint when they created this land.' Tears ran down her cheeks as she thought of how Donella would feel if she knew of her son's pain. She loved you, my child. As she lay dying, her last thoughts were of you. She gave you her beloved father's name, Robrek." The boy looked away from her, but she could see him trembling. When he spoke, his voice was cold. "I have to go. My father will beat me if I'm not at work by noon." He put away his things, fumbling in his eagerness to get away. She called after him. "Robbie, when you can get away, please come and see me. You know where my cottage is, don't you?" "Yes," he said, but he didn't look at her as he rode away. That night his father stopped insisting he stand guard, and Robbie curled up in the bunkhouse. "Can it be true I'm not demon-cursed? Am I really not responsible for my mother's death? Did she truly love me and look like me? Is everything I've always believed about myself nothing but a lie? Was my lady right in calling me an Amahealer rather than a demon?" He'd heard the songs bards sang about Amahealers who calmed the wild beasts with their touch. "Isn't that what I do?" Wild birds regularly landed on his shoulder. A fox had once brought her injured pup to him. They said no one could ride a horse stud, but he did. He tossed and turned half the night, unable to come to any conclusion. When he finally fell into an uneasy sleep, the demon lady came to him again. "Believe her, my son," the woman said to him. "I love you. I have always loved you." On the morning of Litha, Robbie ate breakfast in very low spirits. Holidays always depressed him, because he'd never been allowed to participate in the public celebrations. Across the bunkhouse, Kara and some of the other female servants were whispering. They were probably planning on hurrying to the village to weave fresh greenery and flowers over the outside of the shrine. Several children danced around the bunkhouse, singing about the fire-wheel. "Chasing the fire-wheel is all right for children," Darren told one of them. "But when you're older, Orrin, my friend, you'll realize the fire-wheel is merely the excuse to start the dancing." The talk of dancing made Robbie think of Milady, the only woman who'd ever danced with him. Sudas cursed them all. "If I'm not a demon, shouldn't I be able to go to the celebration with everyone else? It isn't fair." He'd seen the fire-wheel and the dances, but only through the leaves of the trees he'd hidden in. Boyden had always gone out of his way to emphasize how much fun he'd had. Robbie hurried from the bunkhouse. He went to Wild Thing's stall and wiped his eyes against her side. "We don't need them, my girl. Let them have their stupid celebration. We'll have our own, just you and me and Brazen. It'll be fun, won't it?" Wild Thing nuzzled him, trying to comfort him. As he rode towards the stable, he knew he was lying to himself. Brazen was nearly healed now, and he couldn't keep her hidden much longer. Mist had already found her. How long would it be before someone else did? As he came through the trees and saw Brazen shining as if she'd been forged from purest metal, he thought that losing her might well be the hardest thing that had ever happened to him. But if he tried to keep her, he'd certainly be hanged. Robbie greeted the horse and started grooming her, wondering how he could make Brazen understand the need to leave. "Why grieve what you have not lost?" Robbie started as he heard the mind voice that wasn't Wild Thing's. He stared at the bronze mare. Other than basic needs, such as hunger or pain, he'd never gotten anything from Brazen's thoughts. "Was that you, Lady Brazen?" he asked. "Why grieve what you have not lost?" the voice said again, and this time he was certain it was Brazen's. "But I have to lose you soon. Someone other than Mist is bound to find you, and then they'll kill us both." Robbie spoke slowly, trying to picture the problem so the horse could understand. He knew it was probably futile. Wild Thing was the only animal he'd ever known with a mind capable of understanding complex thought. But then Brazen opened her mind to him, and he realized she'd been hiding her intelligence. His mouth fell open. No animal had ever been able to keep him out, and her mind felt even less like a normal horse's than Wild Thing's. "What are you?" he asked. Brazen ignored the question. "Why grieve what you have not lost? I am safe here." "No, you aren't. You don't know these people. When they find you, they'll kill us both." To Robbie's frustration, Brazen repeated herself. "Why grieve what you have not lost? I am safe here. I cannot be found unless I allow it." "I don't know what you are, but people come through these woods. You will be found." "I am safe here. I cannot be found unless I allow it." "I'm not the most popular person around here. All Father Gildas needs is an excuse to kill me, and most of those in the valley would eagerly drag me to the gallows. My own brother would probably donate the rope, and you're in as much danger as I am." "I am safe here. I cannot be found unless I allow it." Robbie tried for nearly an hour to get Brazen to understand the problem, but she simply kept repeating the same thing over and over again until Robbie thought he'd go mad. Finally, he flung up his hands in defeat. "Fine then, get yourself killed, but don't expect me to come here anymore so I can die with you." Robbie swung into Wild Thing's saddle and galloped away. But after putting some distance between himself and the incomprehensible horse, he reined Wild Thing in. He didn't want to go back to the farm in the festive holiday spirit. He looked at the dark skin on his hands and arms. "Are they right to reject me because I'm cursed? Or was Mist telling the truth about my mother?" He thought about the demon lady from his dreams. She loved him like a mother. She and the animals were the only things that had kept him from completely despising himself. Without really deciding to go there, he found himself in front of Mist's cottage. Sitting in the shadow of a small woods, the cottage was a small one-room structure beside the road between Valley Fair and Murtaugh. On two sides of the cottage, the herb witch had gardens bursting with vegetables and herbs. Combined, the gardens were easily 4 times the size of the cottage itself. They were surrounded by rock walls to keep out rabbits and other animals. The cottage backed into the woods. Near the large window in front was a pair of crossed hands, the sign of a healer. He stared at the cottage without dismounting. She had no livestock, which was the only reason anyone ever wanted him around. He didn't know if he could bear finding out she hadn't meant any of the things she said. And he nearly decided to ride away when the door of the cottage swung open, and Mist came out carrying a basket. "You came!" she exclaimed, but he couldn't read the emotion on her face. He looked at the basket. "I was just passing by. I see you're busy. I'll be on my way." No, my child." Mist rushed towards him. "You're far more important than anything I had planned. Please come in. I have cake, and I can brew up some tea." Robbie hesitated. "I don't want to be a bother." "You can never be a bother. Come in." Now her face was beaming, but her excitement was so excessive it had to be forced. He wished he'd never come, but he couldn't think of a good excuse to leave. He wrapped Wild Thing's reins around the saddle horn so they wouldn't get in her way. Then, feeling very out of place, he entered the cottage. The old woman was bustling around making tea and setting out cakes. His stomach growled at the sight of the cake. He'd usually been sent from the table before dessert was served. Badly wanted some of that cake, but he wasn't sure it was worth the awkwardness of being here. The herb witch offered him a seat. He perched on the edge of the chair and couldn't figure out what to do with his hands. Finally, the herb witch placed a cup of tea and a hunk of cake in front of him, and sat down herself. He reached for the cake, but froze when Mist asked, "And how is that great horse?" He picked up the cake and took a bite in order to delay answering. It was delicious. Obviously, she hadn't told anyone about Brazen, but he didn't know how far he could trust her. But his frustration with the beast won out. "She's determined to get us both killed," he fumed. "She says she's safe at that stable, and nobody can find her. Now, does that make any sense?" Mist's eyes widened. "The horse talks to you? Holy Sulas, your gift is strong." He looked away from her. "What gift?" The herb witch laughed. My dear child, you communicate with animals. You ride a horse stock. You can tell a plant's properties merely from sight and smell. You make medicines imbued with magic, despite the fact you've never had a teacher. Not to mention that a magical horse has come seeking you. How can you not know that you're an Amma healer? In fact, you're the strongest Amma healer I've heard of outside of legends and bards' tales. Robbie almost choked on his tea. Calling him a legend was such an exaggeration it was insulting. I'm not a little boy who believes in bards' tales. He snorted and looked away. He took another sip of the tea in order to have something to do. The stuff tasted like boiled weeds. He could barely gag it down. Well, now, isn't this nice? The herb witch sounded as uncomfortable as he felt. My child, I have neglected you for so long that I don't deserve the privilege. And you have grown stronger than most purely by acting on instinct. But with a teacher, you could become stronger still. Robbie looked at Mist, and her eyes held something close to desperation. He didn't trust her, but she was offering him what he'd always wanted since he was 5 years old. He hated being ignorant. You don't want to be my teacher. I'm not very smart. I doubt that very much. I bet you already know the use of more than half the herbs in herbal healing in the Joined Kingdoms. She fetched a book from the shelf in the corner. She sat next to him and put the book on the table in front of him. She opened it to a picture of a plant with purple flowers. What about this one? I don't know its name, but it's good for treating sprains and bruises. Its name is written under the picture. She pointed with her finger and looked at him as if she expected him to read it aloud. He jumped to his feet. For all the good that will do me, I can't read. Father Gildas wouldn't let me attend the temple school because I defiled the goddess's holy place with my presence. I won't waste any more of your time. He stomped towards the door. Moving quicker than Robbie imagined her capable of, Mist interposed herself between him and the door. How dare that ignorant fool say such a thing to a child? A priest of the goddess of healing, he calls himself. What blasphemy! 1 jar of your ointment contains more of Sulus's holy magic than his entire shrine. After neglecting you for your entire life, I do not deserve the privilege of teaching you, and I will not blame you if you leave and never want to see me again. But if you walk out that door, do so because you have judged me unworthy to be your teacher, not because an arrogant fraud has convinced you you're unworthy to be taught. The herb witch stepped aside. Holy Sulus, if she can teach me to read, wouldn't it be worth whatever she wants to do with me? He looked at the book, but he didn't move. Seeming to sense both his desire and his fears, the herb witch took him by the arm. He didn't resist as she led him back to the table. Miss sat beside him again and used the herbal to teach him sounds and letters. Despite his misgivings, he found himself relaxing in the old woman's presence. 2 hours later, he was already stumbling through the first few pages. He was amazed there wasn't some greater mystery to it. The herb witch smiled at him. My child, never call yourself stupid again. When he left, she gave him the book, asking him to study what he'd learned that day. Come back as soon as you can. I will, mistress. If I'm not stupid, maybe I'm not evil either. As Robbie neared the farm in the late afternoon, Alan and Darren stepped out into the road. I wouldn't go home right now if I were you, Alan warned him. It might not be safe. Why not? Alan shrugged. Just might not be, that's all. Robbie didn't know what to make of Alan's cryptic warning, so he slid off Wild Thing, left the road, and crept up to the farmyard from behind the barn. Most of the farmhands and servants and his brother Boyden stood in front of the main house. His father emerged. You have something you want to discuss with me? Yes, father, Boyden said. This morning we all purified ourselves at Sulus's holy shrine in celebration of Letha. Now we ask you to allow us to purify the farm. You want to sprinkle holy water around? It's your holiday. You can waste it any way you want to. Angus turned to go back inside, but stopped at Boyden's voice. Holy water can't purify if the contamination isn't first removed. Father Gildas warned we wouldn't be under the protection of the goddess as long as you insist on keeping the seed of evil on our lands. Angus whirled to face Boyden. I won't have you repeat that lying fraud's words. You will respect your mother. Angus turned to the crowd. These are my lands, and anyone who has a problem with the way I run things is free to leave. But I will not hear anything against my wife or my son, nor will I tolerate him being harmed. If things hadn't been so tensed, Robbie would have laughed at the irony. His father had harmed him far more than anyone else ever had. If you don't have anything better to do than stir up trouble, maybe you should get back to work. So which will it be? Are you going into the village for the feast and the firewheel and the dancing? Or do I have you head out to the west fields and repair that fence that needs attention?" The farmhands hesitated, but soon started to drift away. Angus treated his hands better than any other farmer in the valley, better than he treated Robbie himself. Boyden didn't move, but stood arguing with his father, although too quietly for Robbie to hear. Then, to Robbie's shock, Angus slapped Boyden. Robbie had never seen his father hit Boyden before. His brother stomped away. Robbie turned to Alan and Darren, who'd crept up behind him. "What's going on?" He forced the words through clenched teeth, his hands forming fists. Alan scratched his head. "Father Gildas pretty much said until you were gone we're all cursed." "What have I ever done to anyone?" He didn't dare sleep in the bunkhouse, and he wasn't about to move back into the main house, but he was too angry and frightened to plan further. For the first time in his life, he didn't want to leave the farm. He didn't want to leave the bronze mare or the herb witch who'd promised to be his teacher, but he didn't want to die either. He headed towards the one place he could feel safe. When he reached the forest stable, he found Brazen waiting by the padlocked fence as if she expected him. Still irritated with the horse, Robbie didn't say anything as he unsaddled and started rubbing down Wild Thing. "Fetch the sword," Brazen commanded. "You will learn to fight with the sword." Robbie stared at the horse. "What?" "Fetch the sword. You will learn to fight with the sword." "Are you mad? In case you haven't noticed, I'm a peasant. I can't carry a sword, especially one like that. I'd be arrested and hanged as a thief." "Fetch the sword. You will learn to fight with the sword." "If no one can find us unless you allow it, why would I need the Sulis damn sword?" Brazen didn't even seem to notice his mocking tone. "Fetch the sword. You will learn to fight with the sword. It is your destiny." Robbie laughed as Brazen patronized him in the same manner Mist had earlier. "And what destiny would that be? Getting my throat cut in my sleep?" Robbie turned away from her and tried to ignore her. But all the while he groomed Wild Thing, Brazen kept repeating herself. He went inside the stable, wrapped himself in the blanket, and put another one over his head to block out the horse's absurd demands. But since the voice was inside his head, the blanket did nothing to block out the noise. Brazen followed him inside, stood next to him, and kept repeating herself, until Robbie couldn't stand it any more. "Fine!" He jumped to his feet. "I'll get the Sulis cursed sword if it will shut you up." He grabbed the sword and went out into the paddock. Brazen followed him and corrected the manner he was holding the sword. Then she took him through stances and basic thrusts and parries, the image of these movements coming to him from Brazen's mind. Despite his irritation, it wasn't long before he started enjoying himself. The blade flashing in the light of the setting sun exhilarated him. After some time he dropped, panting on the ground. He was used to hard physical labor, but the muscles used in swordplay were different from those required in farm labor. "A good beginning." Robbie merely rolled his eyes, put the sword away, and fell into an exhausted sleep. In his dreams, he met Milady. With shining swords in both of their hands, they fought off their enemies, and then made love under the stars.